All right. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Museum Monday with high caliber history and with gun websites. Our goal here is to take you guys kind of on a virtual tour of different firearms museums and firearms collections across the country. So that if you're traveling to a certain spot, you can go, I wonder if there's anything cool gun related here. And we can kind of point you in that direction. And we also want to hear from you as well. You can let us know in the comments if there's a museum or a gun collection that you know of that you think we should cover. We definitely want to hear about it. And so the goal here is for us to each kind of cover a museum a little bit, take you on a bit of a virtual tour. And as we're running these shows now, we're going to do a few that are pre-recorded, and then once a month we'll take your comments from the sections and you can ask us questions, and then we'll go live and do a big discussion on it. So this is very much designed to be interactive, even though it's pre-recorded, except for the once a month. But we want you to be involved. We enjoy these firearms in these museums, and we want you to enjoy them too. So what museum are we going to first today?
Let's take a look back in Oklahoma City, and I'll screen capture here, and we'll head to the Cowboy Museum. So again, kind of starting out with the map, we got Oklahoma there, and Oklahoma City is pretty much dead center. And just like the 45th Infantry Museum we looked at last time, this one's right off the highway, so right off of 44. You see it as you're driving through the highway, and if I flip over to the satellite view, this is an art museum. This is more than just cowboy guns. This is everything cowboy. So it's a neat museum. It's up on a hill and plenty of parking and just a really dramatic place. It's an art museum and very, very nice, very fancy. So it's the National Cowboy Museum. I heard about it when I was doing a tour, just like we talked about as I was driving. People let me know, hey, you're going to be in Oklahoma City, check this out. And I am glad they did. Got some pictures here I'll share. And tough to get a picture of the outside because it's very architecturally artistic also. So this is about the best shot I could get of the front. There's more than one entrance, I suspect. There's some other things, auditoriums and stuff. Now, I visited late in the day and they were close to closing. So I told them I just really wanted to see the gun part. So they kind of let me in the last few minutes, and I ran down to where there's a couple of places in the museum where the guns are. But again, this is a cowboy museum. So they talk about cowboy and culture, in art, in media, and in politics and in industry. It's really a neat museum. I got to see a lot of it as I ran through, literally ran through to the gun part. This is a portion that talks about the Hollywood type of cowboy. And they've got, well, I can't say how many specific pieces they have. They definitely have representations, probably pieces from the plot, the movies and stuff, but I don't know if they're the individuals' guns and costumes and stuff. Those might be in their own individual museums, but certainly representations from probably most of the movie productions. Then they asked me not to take pictures of the art. I figured so many people took pictures of the statue, I would. That's sort of my representation, that there's a lot of interesting art from all different kinds of stuff there, and can't take pictures of it. The museum is kind of structured in a timeline. So as you kind of walk the perimeter of the big gun room, you go from the oldest to, it doesn't get real modern, it gets to the 1800s, I guess, early 1900s. And this is a pretty good representation of it. It's all behind glass, pretty complete, and more than just guns. And the descriptions aren't next to the items. You kind of are going to do some reading, and it can be a little fatiguing. If I remember right, though, there were some interactive things, some things you could carry around and get an audible tour. But if you're just going to walk around, you kind of see that it's tough to be standing here and read what's going on. But like I said, there were some more than one interactive thing that you could participate in. I think I'm either this and the Autry Museum in LA are very similar to me, because I spent so little time in this one. So I might be conflating them, but I'm pretty sure it's this museum had the little thing you could pick up and listen to a tour. And then again, you can see pretty complete, and lighting is good, and a good background, so it's decent for pictures. And no one was there. Again, I got there kind of late in the day, so that might not be the best representation, but you're going to be by yourself, I suspect, at this type of museum. This isn't the focus. The guns aren't the focus of it. And so if you're looking for explanations from a person at the museum, that wasn't apparent. That wasn't like, I think that might be different. It's, a museum focused on guns.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, this just to kind of wrap it up, there's a whole bunch of cowboy stuff that I know I'm not missing or I'm not touching on, because the guns I would suggest are probably quarter, if maybe 20% even of the museum. There's a lot of other stuff there besides guns.
Okay, but that's very cool because it's all, with it being the Cowboy Museum, it all kind of ties together that Western theme and guns. And chances are, if you're a gun guy, you're probably a Western guy as well. So you probably enjoy seeing, the different saddles and Remington sculptures and stuff like that. Frederick Remington.
Well, see, that's the thing. I'm not really a cowboy guy. I grew up out east, but the thing is, there's so many ways that guns influence culture. That's what I think was neat about this one, is that I never really thought. I mean, you think that cowboy thinks of that gun as a tool, and a lot like a soldier. It's one of the tools that they're going to have with them as a necessity. So one of the few items they're definitely going to have with them, and
Sure.
it costs a lot. So it's like a watch maybe, or like a knife, I suspect. Like it's a tool, but it's vital, and it's with them all the time. So it's going to get a different level of appreciation. And then it's in culture. And how do you describe that to people? Some people like to think that guns are this violent subculture that, is happening in the dark or something, when guns are literally all over this country, and because of that, all over the whole world. Well, I mean, I guess the rest of the world experiences guns too, but with cowboys and stuff, that just brought it to light in a different way. So I go, you mentioned the Springfield Museum last time. That gets you to go into these museums, gets you a summary, I guess, like the extract of a whole part of the gun culture that you might not experience. So you wouldn't have to go to like a whole bunch of single action shooter type of events, or you wouldn't have to, I don't know, watch a whole bunch of movies. You could go to something like this and really get an experience with cowboy guns, even if you're not interested in cowboy guns, just to kind of get them all at once.
Sure. Yeah, and that's great. And also if you're going to these museums and someone's not necessarily a gun person and you're driving them to the museum, be like, oh, but they've got it's cowboy stuff. Let's go check out the horse stuff. So you could have people with varying interests enjoying different parts of the museum at the same time, right?
Oh, that's a great point. And this one is definitely good for that, because you could be into almost anything. I mean, even if you're not into cowboys or westerns and that kind of stuff, there's just impressive art, just amazing art, just of the West. So
Mm-hmm.
if you just appreciate the kind of neat stuff that cowboys deal with, nature and wildlife and chores and all that neat stuff that is Americana out here, at least on the West.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that part of it is neat. And it's in Oklahoma City, which we talked about, the 45th Infantry Museum, Oklahoma City Memorial. There's other things to do there, and the gun shops and stuff. But yeah, this museum specifically, you could bring pretty much anybody, I would think, and they could find something to do while you're absorbing the guns.
Very cool. Yeah, because that's
I'll say too, maybe 2 hours. If you're really into guns, if you just wanted to see it all, you still need to give yourself more than maybe an hour, because they're laid out different areas of the museum.
That's great. Very cool. And it is great that there are so many different aspects of it that other people can enjoy, because sometimes it's hard to get people to want to go to a museum with you if they think it's, if it's just going to be a drag and it's of no interest to them. A lot of these museums, I get a feeling a lot of the museums that we're going to cover are, gun specific, and it'll be hard to drag someone who's not into guns to the museum. But this one, I think would be a very easy sell to anyone, because like you said, you find something that interests them one way or the other.
And you can see it's clean, it's nice, there's bathrooms everywhere, benches to sit and stuff. So yeah, very comfortable museum as well.
That's great. That's awesome. Really cool place, and definitely one of the ones that I got to put on the list, and definitely want to check out when I get out that way. Very, very cool, because I'm, I, like you, born and raised in the East. and I'm infatuated with the West. I think a lot of people are. That's why it's so popular in movies and everything, because it captures the imagination of everyone.
So what museum are you focusing on this week?
So this week I'm going to do something a little bit different. It's kind of an odd little museum, but there's something that I think is really cool about it. So what we're going to be talking about is the Warren Rifles Confederate Museum. I'll get my screen share going here. And don't let it confuse you when I say the Warren Rifles Confederate Museum. It may throw some people off, but it's actually a really interesting facility. It's run by the local United Daughters of the Confederacy chapter, um, and it's out here in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. It's not too far from where I live. So if I flip over to the map here, you can see, we're due west of Washington, D.C. Here's Winchester, Virginia, and the state line. And it's a little museum. Make no mistake, it is a small museum, and it is Civil War focused. But what I think is really cool about it is that a lot of the pieces they have on display have come from the descendants of the individuals who carried them. And so we've got these historic arms, and we know who had that gun in the conflict, which I think is really, really cool. So for example, this is a Colt 49 pocket, along with a very unusual red leather holster and belt that he's got there. But we know that a guy named Presley Gabriel Neville, Company E, 7th Virginia Cavalry, had this pistol with him during the Civil War. And I think it's really cool to be able to pin it to a specific person, because so often, we see these guns and we just have to imagine who had them in history, but we actually know who had them. This is another Colt here, and in this case, we have an image of the guy. Can't really tell from the picture, but maybe he's even wearing it on his belt in this photo. And I just really like that we can make it so incredibly personal, and know the people through their objects. Here's a 51 Navy, belonged to Giles Cook Jr., Company E, 7th Virginia Cavalry. He was originally with the 17th Virginia Infantry, Company B, and then switched over to Cav, and this was his gun. And the Colt 1851 Navy is an iconic black powder pistol, and definitely one of the most iconic of the Civil War era. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of them carried in the war, but this is the only one that belonged to Giles Cook. And it's a really cool ability to have that personalized touch with it. And of course, they've got different uniforms and stuff that they also have identified to people, and they've got some battlefield relic pickup stuff. This is kind of cool. It's a Model 1840 wristbreaker cavalry saber, and the handle and the leather wrap and everything's gone. So you can see how the tang connected with the wrist guard and everything, which I think is kind of neat to see it like that in that relic condition. John Singleton Mosby's spurs. Mosby was the Gray Ghost, very well-known individual in history. So they've got a set of his spurs, which I think is cool. Powder horn and pistol belonging to a couple guys out of Mosby's Rangers. John Mason Lawrence, that's his powder horn, and his Allen and Wheelock pistol there. And I really like the fact that we can tie it to a specific person. I just think that is so incredibly cool.
Seriously, you see sometimes commemorative ones, right, where a factory made one specially for somebody, or somebody's a president or general or something, and they get one that's fancy, so that's their gun, but they never used it. And then I've been to museums where they claim to have so-and-so's revolver. This is Buffalo Bill's thing, and again, famous celebrity. It kind of makes sense that the gun's still going to be in their collection or whatever. But this is, just think about the not just the stories, but that's real life. These are regular individuals, and collection or museums don't have time to even acquire or display this. So this is neat that they are doing this, that they have the time and the interest to display these pieces of individuals' lives and the stories of this is the threads that hold up our story of the United States, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And history exists, I think, on two ends of the spectrum. It's big picture, like you said, presidents and generals and stuff. But then it's on the other end of the spectrum is the individual. It's big picture and it's micro. And this is the micro end of it, the getting into the nitty gritty, the individual soldiers who were actually fighting and carrying these guns. It wasn't like you said, it was a presentation piece. These guns aren't they never did just sit on a desk somewhere. They actually saw battle. This pair of Colt 1860 Armies here, for Major Robert Simpson. Does it say his unit? It doesn't say his unit, but the cool thing about those pistols is that they're both cut for a shoulder stock, which is a neat accessory and something that you don't always see on those pistols. And it's really cool to put it together and know that, he carried that gun. Here again is another 60 Army. And this is the individual who carried that gun. Let's see, Samuel Buck. Cool wartime image of him, and then of his grave. He lived until 1920. So that's pretty cool to be able to see this. He was with Company H in the 13th Virginia Infantry, and there's his gun. And we know what he looked like as a young man. That's what he would have looked like carrying that gun, which is really cool to be able to tie that all together. And then they've got some stuff that isn't identified in the museum either as more representative. And these I thought were kind of cool. This is originally it was a Harper's Ferry made flintlock musket. I think the date on it was 1838. It's hard to read over there on the side, but it's been converted to a percussion ignition system, which of course was the more prevalent ignition system by the time of the Civil War. And you see that it's got this civilian percussion hammer. You see a little bit of, I guess, almost like floral engraving, crudely floral engraving on the hammer, which is very indicative of early Confederate conversion stuff. You see a lot of it in that style. If you see enough of it, you start to recognize it. And so even though this is just a generic nondescript musket, it tells a story in its own right. It's a technology story of the evolution from flintlock to percussion, and it's civilian done and it's Confederate done in the time of war, when they needed to be able to do it most and get everything switched over to use the most cutting edge technology of the day. Again, so we get imported stuff. This is a British Enfield pattern 1853 coming out of the Tower of London. A lot of these were used in the Confederacy as well as some in the Union also, but predominantly in the South. But it's so cool to be able to go through this little museum and see all of the different guns and pin them to the people, because again, it's just this nondescript little brick building in Front Royal, Virginia. And if you're driving by, you're probably going to miss it, unless you know what to look for. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time to go through. It's a relatively small museum. Like the Cowboy Museum you mentioned, chances are you're probably going to be the only person there going through, which is not a bad thing. And they certainly encourage all kinds of photography. And the little lady docents that are normally there, they know quite a bit about the stuff that's on display, because a lot of it came through the descendants of the people, and obviously those people know their ancestors, and so it's very easy for them to talk about different aspects of it. And it's just something different. Most of the gun museums we're going to talk about, it's guns on guns on guns on guns on guns, and it's fairly impersonal, but the vast majority, 80-90% of the stuff in this particular museum is all identified to someone, and in many cases we're getting a picture of the person to go with it, and it's just really cool to be able to make that personal connection, because you don't always get it, and it's a cool feeling to put that together. Here we are looking at this gentleman, looking at one another 150 years separated. But here he is, and we're making that connection today. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, keeping that history is an important part of awareness of, our, again, like the what we hold value, what we value, what we keep. So
exactly.
Knowledge in it and seeing this stuff. Now, there's a couple of things you touched on. First, the female dokens. Never assume, right? Like if someone's working in the museum, we went to the Browning Museum the first time, and you've been to the Browning Museum, you go upstairs at this train museum, and all of a sudden you're amongst some of Browning's prototypes. You're in his workshop, you're amongst some of the holy grail of Browning stuff, and it's smaller than you expect, and we're overwhelmed, you could say, easily. And there was only one little lady there, and I didn't want to assume anything, so I asked her a question or two, and she knew more about Browning than anybody I've ever met. And she showed us where the buildings were in town and made sure we could lay hands on it. I mean, just amazing. So never assume that the little old guy who's there isn't going to know, or the little old lady that's there can't possibly know.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't understand about museum volunteers and about museum docents, is that the majority of them, oh, it's in the name, they're volunteers. They're not being paid, and so if they're going to come give their time to hang out at a museum and impart that knowledge, it's because they know their stuff. They know what's going on, and they want to share that passion. So absolutely, don't judge a book by its cover. They have a tremendous amount of information to share, and they want to share it with you.
And then the second thing I wanted to ask, if you could bring on them pictures up again, what was with that plexiglass display? I don't think I've ever seen like those revolvers were in some sort of a plexiglass stand.
Oh yeah,
that seemed pretty
neat. It is neat, and that's one of the things I've talked to these people, because again, I had mentioned this isn't too far from where I live, and they had one of their volunteers actually made these stands out of the acrylic. Usually you see guns on, either prop rods or these like little fork stands and stuff.
When they stick something down the barrel, because then you don't got nothing touching the gun, and the worst is that there's something sticking out the barrel. But this is pretty darn close to being the neatest thing, because it's just sort of almost like hovering there, but not in a weird angle or anything either.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't say it disappears, because it doesn't.
It doesn't. Just cartridges for it, or is that just the pieces of brass holding the? I don't really figure. I can't figure out how these things. Is that the big thick piece of plexiglass that it's carved?
Yeah. Those are the screws going through the two different sides of the piece of the plexiglass holding it together. So they're not cartridges. That's part of the construction of the stand.
So it's sort of like a plexiglass taco shell, and then the revolver is cut so it's in the top there and just kind of hovering, like
right. Yeah. It's a gun taco. Is kind of a neat way to put it. Yeah. So they take these chunks of plexi, and I'm sure the guy drew out the outline on the pattern and then cut them out, and then the gun just kind of nestles right down into the two different sides of the plexi. It's very cool. I'd never seen anything like it before. I'm glad you brought it up, because it did catch my eye when I went in there. I've seen a lot of different gun displays and just display techniques in all the different museums I've worked in over the years, but I'd never seen anything quite like this. I thought it was very cool.
It is, and it seems solid. They're not going to fall over. Now, it might get dusty. You'd have to have, these are behind glass, so they don't have to worry about it too bad, but you are going to have to dust this, but that's about it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, you don't have to worry about it falling over. It's very, very sturdy. And it's unobtrusive, you
Yeah,
know. You
those the little hooks. They're just they're no big deal, but they rub you the wrong way sometimes when you're like, I want to see that gun, and there's a brass hook around it or something.
right, exactly. You know, oh, it's obscuring this detail or whatever that I was hoping to take a look at. And yeah, with this you don't have to worry about something like that. You've got a good view on it no matter what. So very cool.
Now we've been recording these, so I'm not sure if we've already mentioned it, but again, this is a neat concept too because it's not like we were talking a big museum or a portion of a big museum or an impressive collection. This is just what it's all about. That firearms are part of our culture and our society and everything, part of our history, and these are people that are sharing that in almost kind of a tucked away place. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring the internet to connect these places, let people know about them, and we're asking people to help us discover these, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You know, I think I'd mentioned, you know, it's just a little brick building. It's nondescript. You would probably drive right by it if you didn't know any better. And the whole goal is awareness. You know, there's not a whole lot of visitation there, but there's a lot of knowledge to be gained from it. And it's definitely something that yeah we're encouraging folks to stop and check it out because it's definitely something you don't want to just drive by. You want to see it. So the next thing that we're going to talk about a little bit here, because there is such a wide variety of museums out there, and there's a wide variety of tastes, you know. So we're going to address, you know, what makes a good gun museum, and we're coming at this from two different sides. You know, I've got I am a museum professional, and G-Webs here is a professional museum visitor, and it's fantastic in both rights. But we see things from different perspectives sometimes, you know, and so we're kind of you know what makes a good museum exhibit to me might be different for him. And it's neat to get those differing perspectives. So why don't you start? Tell us what in your mind is makes a museum exhibit really great.
A good one. So I really like this idea of having this segment. So give us some feedback on this one if you're watching in the comments or when we do the live show each month. I think I started really. My dad was into Civil War stuff, so he was in his visiting the Civil War battlefield. So I literally can't remember not visiting museums either eagerly or being dragged into them and everything in between. So I've seen a lot of them, and I do appreciate them. I like that they're part of the way the firearms are part of our culture and everything. So to me, I think what I value in them is accessibility. So both physical location to other things, parking, and facilitation of just accessibility of the museum, brightness and um, openness, I guess, so that it's some of the neatest museums are kind of dark and you have to know what you're looking for. I like the ones that are well labeled and that can, I guess, condone bringing someone into any level of our community, whether it be the nuts and bolts or just how firearms interact with culture and society or history or industry or that's what I like about a museum. Our value in a museum is its uh, uh, accessibility.
Gotcha. Yeah, you know, and it's interesting that you brought up a couple different times, and you'd mentioned it in our previous episode, particularly talking about the 45th Infantry Museum. But you mentioned lighting, and that it's nice and bright, and that everything's visible, and that is one of the classic battles between museum staff and museum visitor is light, because light is damaging.
Right. It's
Um,
enemy, literally. It's useful, but it destroys cloth and leather, right?
Exactly. And believe it or not, it can actually bleach the color out of gun stocks as well if it sits there long enough or if the light is bright enough and obtrusive enough. And so that is the constant battle between visitor and staff is how do you balance being able to see these guns adequately enough to appreciate them but also keep them at light levels that are low enough that they're going to last for generations to come, so that our kids and grandkids and great grandkids can be able to see these pieces and appreciate them in the exact same way that we were able to appreciate them. And that's tough at times. Some of the smaller museums generally are better lit. The 45th Infantry Museum is pretty darn well lit. And the Warren Rifles Confederate Museum that I'd shown you is pretty well lit. And that's because they're using, regular fluorescent lighting. But that is damaging over time. One of my favorite critiques of museum lighting, and I want to cover this museum in one of our future episodes, is the fairly new Museum of the American Revolution up in Philadelphia. And there's a gun magazine called Man at Arms magazine. And when they went and toured it, they wrote up a feature on it. And I kid you not, at least half a dozen times they complained about the lighting levels being too low, that they couldn't see anything. And it made my skin crawl when at the very end he said, and I encourage you to bring your own small flashlight so that you can shine it on the stuff and see it better. I'm just like, oh man, it kills me inside. And I get it. You want to be able to see the stuff, but the lighting levels are the way they are for a reason. And you just kind of have to adapt a little bit. So I'm glad you brought up the lighting levels, because I love being able to see stuff, but I want to make sure it's preserved for generations to come as well.
Right. Understanding there's a price, and none of us want to be the last generation to experience anything.
Exactly. Yeah. And to go into, another thing, what makes a museum great to me is it's all about the experience. And so the exhibit design means a lot, and the labeling means a lot. I think you and I are both in agreement that it's really nice when the labels are right there with the object. You're not having to hunt around for the text,
Right. It's almost like a quiz sometimes. I'm not sure if there's a strategy to that, to like get more comprehension. It probably gives you more comprehension when you have to seek out, but yeah.
Well, I think sometimes it can be a space constraint. Sometimes, other times it's more of an aesthetic design. So if you guys remember in the previous episode, we talked about the Cowboy Museum, or maybe that was this episode. I don't know. I lose track. But anyway, the Cowboy Museum, they had the labels weren't right with the objects, and that was kind of more of an art museum. And so that's more of an art museum style to not have the labels right there, because they're all about the aesthetic.
The experience, the engraving and stuff. And it would look really tacky if you had like a diorama with a bunch of labels everywhere, because then it would look tacky. You don't get the experience of what the diorama is trying to give you.
Exactly. So it all goes back to what is the goal of the museum, and what are they trying to get across to the visitor. And every museum is different. And every curator is different, as these different folks are putting things together. We all come from different mindsets and different schools of things. And that's why you see a wide variety of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, we're both in agreement that what makes a museum really great is that it's got quality stuff, it's accessible, and that it enriches the visitor. You don't want so much text that it's overwhelming and it's not going to get read, but you don't want so little that you're left going, oh, what the heck am I looking at? Then it just becomes open storage, and it's just a whole bunch of stuff, which is cool to look at. Like in our one of our first episodes, we did the Springfield Museum and we talked about the organ of muskets. It's cool to look at, but that's about it. It's not really telling a story. You're not getting much out of it. So there's balance to it all, right?
Right. It's an experience for sure. And the assembly of that, or like going into J.M. Davis, just knowing that many guns were accumulated by one guy and they're there, and the whole story is neat. But again, for data collection or research, it's not the goal of those museums, I guess, or those displays.
Exactly. Yep. And so, yeah, so that's kind of what we think makes for a great museum and a great exhibit. Let us know in the comments if you agree, if you disagree, or if there's things we didn't point out. We want to know what you think makes a great museum exhibit. We definitely want that feedback, and we'll cover some of those comments in the live show that we do here coming up.
When we talked about the light, I was thinking openness so much as the lighting, but the lighting and the glass is a big one. And maybe we talk about these in future shows to get more specific on them. But when you talked about the lighting aspect of it, like I said, I was kind of more thinking just the openness, or being in a cavern versus being in a big open building with 2-story, vaulted ceilings kind of thing. But there's a museum out here at Fort Huachuca that has a lot of tack leather clothing from the Old West, and very, very dark. Darkest museum I've ever been in, because of everything in there is susceptible to any light, and barely a little light for anything, and you almost stumble. It's kind of dangerous because there's so little light. But two things to address that. You walk into a Walmart in the middle of the night, and the lights in the frozen food departments will pop on, with sensors as you walk in front of them. So maybe that's a way to address it, where the lights are on for a moment while people are there, and then overall they're not on. Then I'm really liking the idea of maybe a 360 option for people that are doing specific research. There's only so much you can do depending on how crowded the museum is, and depending on your ability to get somebody could let you lay hands on something for research. But doing 360 tours with bright lights then allows the museum most of the time to go back to a better preservative lighting structure. But then, you wanted to see it, and with the lights all on, here's what it would look like, and you can take a virtual tour that way, and that might set some of people's interests.
Yeah, and that's a great idea and a great way to do it, and one of the great things that we're now able to do because of the technology, to be able to do those 360 tours. And you'd mentioned, the lighting, like in the supermarket, having it on motion sensors. They do that in some museums. I've seen that. You walk in and they come on, and if no one's in the gallery, they turn off. And I've also seen with other exhibits, sometimes it's been with rare paintings that they're worried about fading, or another one was a very early copy of the Declaration of Independence. They'll have it in a case, and it's behind glass, and there is a heavy fabric covering that covers the object, and when you want to see it, you go up and pick up that covering, and then the light comes in, the natural lighting comes in from around you so that you can see it, and then it closes off afterward, so that it's not being exposed to light when it doesn't need to be.
Now, speaking of tech, is there anything with glass and lighting that could be accomplished where the visible spectrum is out here where we need it, and then it gets filtered to the actual items? Some kind of
I know a lot of the technology at this point in time is going towards LED lighting, because it doesn't give off heat, which is another concern with the lighting in the exhibit cases. If you're raising the temperature, you end up affecting the humidity. So
you got to deal with the air conditioning and then humidity and all this stuff that just because you wanted to see it, now you have to worry about the climate.
Exactly. And so the LED lights are generally, they don't heat up as much, and they're not nearly as harsh. So that's one of the best ways. And then, if you are dealing with fluorescent lighting, they make UV filters that you can slide over the tubes that help protect from those UV rays. And sometimes they actually have UV panels that you can stick onto windows. So you don't have to worry about, if you've got natural light flooding in, you can still have that natural light, but help mitigate some of the lighting damage. So again, let us know what you'd like to see covered in the future topics. Let us know what you think about what we've covered so far. We're looking forward to reading them and going over some of that stuff in the live show.